and for having me here. Thank you, Elke, to share my screen because I can share it from here. I think it's, I don't know, our link from Portugal is not very well. So, first of all, I want to thank the organization, especially you that are welcoming us, who was always very helpful, especially Elke, with our contacts since 2019. Thank you also to Christine and my fellow panelists. My presentation is the result of research that began in 2018 and lasted until June of 2021. My interest was to understand the role of women in media, especially of Black women in Portugal, Portuguese, Afro-descendant or African working or studying in Portugal. I focused my analysis on television news commentary on the three main channels of Portuguese television. The results are not encouraging and are clear indicators of a long road towards to the integration of gender and races in Portugal. We titled the study Portuguese Television News and Gender, Holding White and Eradicating Black Women. Please, I'll ask to the second slide, please. Thank you. Our purpose. Feminist movements in Portugal have reached new dimensions and diverse representations, both in public domain, especially in politics and leadership positions, as well as in the balance between private and public life. However, when the analysis is the television primetime commentary of news in Portugal, the results is the epithet of gender inequality and factual discrimination against Black women. In the content analysis, we conduct over 4 consecutive years. We conclude that women's participation in these information programs is about 10% and Black women is near zero. So the third slide, please. The summary, just to organize here my presentation and our study. First of all, Black Portuguese women and the colonial past. Second, discrimination by silence, absence, or misrepresentation. And third, Afro-Portuguese people, victims of social and media invisibility. Our analysis, 4 weeks in 4 years, Portuguese television news channels, SIC Notícias, RTP3 e TV24, MTV24, and finally discussion and conclusions, no gender or race balance on television news commentary in Portugal. Please, the first slide. Another one. Thank you. The theme remains taboo in most Portuguese families, either because they returned, Black women, from the African countries decolonized, or because one of the elements is for a former soldier of the Portuguese overseas combat. The Portuguese colonizing past is a publicist portrait is at its present in the memory of contemporary many Portuguese, African, Afro-descendants in Portugal. As this issue is not openly discussed, nor between families, nor even in media, even though the minority presence of Black women in space of media and or political presence in Portugal, the violence to which thousands of Black women are subjected during the colonial period is relegated to some level of where these women are, in third after white and Black men. The other slide, please. This link between colonizing Portugal and post-colonial Portugal, almost always silenced or submitted by most diverse quarters of Portuguese society. It is always more close that the lack of formal studies promoted by state or government on Black communities and mixed in Portugal, says Reis. If we do not know how many they are, where they live, what are the living conditions, the composition of their households, their levels of education, expectations about the immediate future, their relationship with mostly white society, etc. It will certainly be a hard work to understand, in one hand, the social dynamics of people of African descendant people in Portugal. Now, according to data from European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance from 2018, this community continues to have the highest levels of poverty, unemployment, and crime, and it is the main victim of racism violence by police authorities. In addition, this is a scenario that remains in Portugal, but the studies are suffering a lack of investment. The other slide, please. Afro-Portuguese people victims of social and media invisibility. The history of racism in the Western world is eminently associated, on one hand, with colonialism and slavery, and the other hand, with the idea of some superiority of white people. We go to the studies of Miles, Ribeiro, etc. In the current digital dynamics, as critical race theories has shown us, racism remains systemic and endemic in digital spaces, distinguished numerous times by euphemisms that are nothing more than disguises of aggressions of non-white people, which is confirmed also in Portuguese scenario. So this lack of information and reflection on the colonial past and relationship of Portuguese, quotes, I don't know how to say it, but masters with the colonialized communities is not possible to publicly discover the permanent attacks on the dignity essentially of Black women. What does exist, as pointed out by Falconi and Weiser, who collect narratives about Black women as historical subjects of Portuguese colonialism, are reflections on the relationship of white women with the colonial war without any link to women and men Black. Now, as stated by Laval, the Black women, though, seems to open up conflict in the Portuguese national immigration, and her presence becomes the symbol of the return of what for centuries was excluded and identified as the other, comprising territories, people, and bodies to humiliate and conquer, which remains, as we will see, represented on media, or another way to say, misrepresented on Portuguese media. Another slide, please. So our analysis, our analysis is in count 3 major Portuguese news channels. 4 years and 4 weeks, many hours of TV news commentary broadcasts, and we analyze presence of women in general and Black women in particular. Another slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, it's you can pass. Okay, our method is content analysis, as we can see for this two footage. The left we have a white man, and the right we have a white woman. Another one, please. Our results, yeah, we have here our first graphics. In 2018, the analysis shows that the three channels gave preference in great majority to the invited male commentators. Women were invited an average 12.5% of the time. It turns out that there were no white guests, no non-white guests, therefore 0 Black commentators, female or male. As you can see in this graphics, we see the three channels that we analyze, and the first graphic there, and the first and the second graphic, there is no Black women or Black men in this panels of comments in news channels, Portuguese news channels. Another one. In 2019, the scenario is identical. In the three news channels, there were only white guests, mostly men. Women were invited in average 14% of the time. And one more thing, it turns out that there were no non-white guests and 0 Black commentators, female or male. Another slide, please. Before moving on to the analysis of the years marked by the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, we look at the most commentated themes and the distribution by gender and race. Thus, we perceive sport and economics or economy were the most discussed topics in Portuguese news channels. However, women, also white, were only invited to be on the plateau for policy issues and rarely for economic issues. Another very masculine media area on Portugal. And as we have seen, there is no record of a single Black person invited to the news commentary programs. Another slide, please. We reached to 2020, and the world starts to live with a different context, with the COVID-19 pandemic taking over our lives. Regarding our analysis, 30% on average, we realize that this year is marked by two changes. More women in the studios, 30% in average, for the news analysis. For the first time, a woman and 2 Black men were invited to this news commentary plateau. Another slide, please. Thank you. In 2021, the data were very similar to 2020. White men in majority on the plateau, women in 28% of the time, and Black men, 2 Black men and 1 Black woman invited for these programs and panel comments. Another slide, please. Thank you. As we can see, the themes of COVID-19, economy, politics, and sports were the most discussed in news spaces. In the case of COVID-19 and policies about COVID-19, which have dominated the news since the beginning of the 2020, 2020, they opened new spaces for integration of a critical view of the presence of women. However, the analysis made by Afro-descendants in Portugal still remains residual. Another slide, please. Thank you. Thus, the television scenario in news commentary in Portugal is mostly like this: white men dominating the set, and only this invited black woman, who is the actual Minister of Justice, and she is a Mozambican descendant in Portugal. Another slide. So, our discussion and some conclusions. Women in general are eternal minority in news media in Portugal. 2. Black women, as in the colonial past, remains both silent and poorly represented in the news. Even when the themes concern all genders and races, the approach to present is always made by the same protagonists, very rarely someone non-white. 4. It should be noted that, albeit very tenuous, COVID-19 pandemic brought more women to television plateau, even if only 2 black women in 2 years. 5. From these results, we analyze the ineffective application of Getting the Balance Right, published by the International Federation of Journalists with the support of UNESCO, on Portuguese informative television, in a clear and constant trample of gender equity and ethical and racial diversity on media. Another slide, please. Finally, and has additional notes, we are finding out in a new study that Black women in Portugal are not protagonists in the news media and comment spaces. However, they are adding to digital social networks. Here, they have opened new spaces for new public voices. For example, Immune, Institute of Black Women in Portugal, is building a sense of belonging, sharing, and engagement for Black Portuguese women or living in Portugal. In 2019, the president of Immune, Joacine Catar Moreira, was in fact elected deputy to the Portuguese Parliament, even though it is constantly suffering, she is constantly suffering racist attacks driven by the far right or by white men who disagree its representation by Black women in Parliament. So this is my presentation. Thank you so much. Sorry for my poorly English. Here is my contact. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia, for a very clear and very stark account of your topic. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And again, if you've got questions for Sonia, please make a note of them or put them into the chat box. That very unprofessionally is my phone, so hold on a minute. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Okay, so our final speaker in this panel is Kat Marney. She's a lecturer at University of Liverpool. Her research interests include post-feminism in contemporary culture and the relationship between television and cultural memory. She has recently published an article on curating the feminist self on Instagram and a book on women in neoliberal post-feminist television drama representing gendered experiences of the Second World War. So, Kat, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. I'm just going to try and share my screen. Can you all see that?
Brilliant. Yes, that's fine.
Just before I start, I want to do a very brief content warning. I'm going to be talking about the portrayal of some pretty offensive racial stereotypes, and there is an image of blackface, so I just wanted to give that warning before I start. So yeah, I'm Kat Marney. I'm going to be talking about the feminization of the recent past in two female ensemble dramas, Derry Girls and Glow. So Derry Girls was created by Lisa McGee. It was first broadcast on Channel 4 in 2018, when I believe it was the most watched series in Northern Ireland. It's set in Derry in Northern Ireland in the 1990s at the height of the Troubles. And as I said, it's a female ensemble drama, so the primary perspective in the series is given to school-age girls and one boy. Glow, short for The Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling, is based on a 1986 television series of the same name, which was a women's professional wrestling promotion. It was brought to Netflix by Liz Flahive and Carly Mensch after they saw a documentary on the original television series, which was produced by a member of the original cast. So it was a Netflix original released in 2017, and Flahive and Mensch both have histories of working on series with strong but flawed female protagonists. So you have things like Nurse Jackie, Weeds, and most recently Orange is the New Black. So the fourth and final series of Glow began filming in 2020, but was quite surprisingly cancelled while on COVID hiatus. And it's another female ensemble drama, so it's a central cast dominated by women. You do have figures of male authority in the form of Sam Sylvia, who is the director of the In-World TV show, and Bash Howard, who is its financier. But they are very much outnumbered and frequently outmaneuvered by the women around them. So the decentering of male subjectivity is central to both series' conceptualization of their diegetic periods. The 90s in Northern Ireland and the 1980s in America have traditionally been imagined along clearly demarcated gendered lines, with male perspectives and histories dominant in both the violence of the Troubles and the conservatism and yuppie culture of the 1980s. Both series subvert these expectations by allowing the experiences, desires and perspectives of their female characters to drive the narrative. In Derry Girls, the male characters are a vital part of the comedic formula, and the ongoing battles between the two kind of modalities of masculinity embodied by Grandad Joe and Dad Jerry dramatise the renegotiation of Northern Irish masculinities in the light of the Troubles. But authority within the family resides firmly with Ma Mary. But it's James, the only Englishman in Derry, who best encapsulates this decentering, othered both by his gender in an all-girls Catholic school and by his nationality, which is constantly remarked upon. He is finally assimilated in the last episode of Series 3, when he chooses to remain in Derry rather than going back to England, and proudly proclaims himself to be a Derry girl, relinquishing both his gender and his Englishness. Glow also decenters masculine authority in the context of the wrestling ring, although male preferences and power is at play in the constant struggles to keep Glow on the air. But It's Glow's celebration of feminine physicality that for me sets this show apart. Kia Stevens, who you can see flying through the air in the bottom left image on the slide, is a real life professional wrestler, and Chavo Guerrero Jr., who gives his name to Chavo's gym where the women train in the series, was employed as a trainer and consultant on the series to ensure a level of authenticity that would prevent fans of real life wrestling being alienated by the series. And you can see on the slide some of my favourite images of the power of these women's bodies. Alison Brie particularly is an absolute machine. And when the camera does linger on the women's bodies, it's to emphasise that strength. It's to emphasise their musculature and the bruises that they've sustained in the ring rather than sexualising them. And this is one of the central themes of the series, proving that women can master and perform these complex wrestling moves as well as men can. So both Derry Girls and Glow are what Alison Landsberg would describe as historically conscious dramas, in that they are not factual history, but rather seek to recreate the lived contours of a particular historical moment. So public history is shaped and constituted as a discourse between television versions of the past and the reactions and responses of those who watch and engage with them. De Groot, Gray and Bell have talked about the value of this phenomenon and gone as far as suggesting it as an alternative historiography. Landsberg argues that, quote, history on television can offer a kind of complexity that, although different from the complexity of a monograph, produces a kind of historical knowledge that even an academic historian would recognise as having value, end quote. As always, there is the ever-present question of accuracy with historical fiction. And I don't know about you, but one of my favourite pastimes is obsessively Googling, did this actually happen, when something takes me by surprise in a historical drama. And I remember when I was watching, I think it was series 2 of The Crown, one of the top suggested Google searches was about the Aberfan disaster, which to my shame, I knew very little about. So if nothing else, television history is sparking interest. It's a prompt for people to seek knowledge and to learn about the past. And I really love this phrase, lived contours, because I think that's exactly what good historical drama does, because it's what good television does. It's absorbing and transportive, and it takes you into a world to feel its tensions, its fears and its desires. Thinking again about The Crown, I found the last season, season 3, agonizing, and my husband, who was forced to watch a couple of episodes with me, also did, but for very different reasons, staunch anti-monarchist that he is, because the depiction of Diana's dwindling well-being and the claustrophobia that the series is so good at producing, even when it's set in these grand palaces, is palpable. And what I think both Derry Girls and Glow do exceptionally well is to render those lived contours from a predominantly female perspective, and one that is markedly distinct from other conceptualizations of the period. In an interview with Channel 4, Lisa McGee said that the response to Derry Girls in Northern Ireland was, quote, overwhelmingly positive. She said, I think Northern Irish people have never seen themselves represented this way before. They really responded to being shown a more positive, funny side to home. It was something that they felt ownership over. They really saw themselves in it, end quote. And that sense of recognition and relief at that recognition is evident in much of the Northern Irish fan reaction to Derry Girls. I read a recent review of the series in which a group of Derry teenagers were quoted as saying, oh, we're all Michelles. And you can see a screenshot from the Discovery Northern Ireland webpage directing visitors to Derry to some of the settings from the series and advising those yet to see it to, quote, catch themselves on. There's also an image on the slide of a mural of the central characters on a pub called Badgers in central Derry, which the landlord refers to as the New Derry Mural. And given the political and historical significance of murals during the Troubles, this is a powerful statement of recognition and celebration. But this positive depiction in Derry Girls doesn't come at the expense of political and historical astuteness. The Troubles are never glossed over or diminished in the series. but their presence is translated through the social experiences and expectations of a group of adolescent teen girls, as a lived experience that is part of their everyday lives. And a lot of dramatised depictions of the Troubles and Northern Ireland during this period, powerful films like Bloody Sunday, focus on individual incidents that are understood as flashpoints in the Troubles as a historical and political phenomenon. Derry Girls, by contrast, uses the Troubles as a dynamic backdrop that is ever present but normalised for the people living through it. When their bus is stopped to be searched for explosives, Michelle wonders whether the handsome English soldier would frisk her if she told him she had an incendiary device down her knickers. In the first episode of season 2, Erin et al. Attend a Friends Across the Barricade event based on an experience from McGee's own childhood designed to foster relations between Irish and Catholic teens. Protestants and Catholic teens, sorry. Quote, "It was all about the boys." The positive, ordinary and recognisable depiction of this period of Northern Irish history is in a large part facilitated by the series' privileging of feminine subjectivity, perspective and experience. And one of the key ways that both Derry Girls and Glow construct and maintain their feminised sensibility is through music, as well as featuring songs that are immediately recognisable as belonging to each series' diegetic time period. Both heavily feature female artists and voices. Glow is peppered with 80s classics that form an immersive sonic backdrop. Perhaps my favourite use of music is the opening credits, which you only get to see in full in episode 1, and which I unfortunately don't have time to play, but I recommend you go and watch. In which you have these gorgeous neon animations of the female wrestlers performing wrestling moves and celebrations and strapping up knees over Patti Smith's The Warrior. The neon brights and the music encapsulate the 1980s aesthetic, but also the spectacle of feminine strength and physicality that are a huge part of the series. Derry Girls opens with a reading from Erin's diary over panoramic shots of Derry, which includes teen boys painting over the London prefix of Londonderry, while The Cranberries' Dreams plays in the background. And talking about her choice in music, McGee explained, quote, "We didn't want it to feel edgy, so we used a lot of breezy, bright stuff, and we tried to use stuff with a lot of female vocals." So you can see that all of the elements of this series work together to produce an aesthetic and a sensibility that is markedly feminine, and one that will evoke nostalgia for women and men who lived through this period. The aesthetic and sensory evocation of the past is also realised through wardrobe and styling. The costume designer who worked on Glow used vintage JCPenney's catalogues to recreate an authentic 1980s athleisure aesthetic. So the characters and the wrestling costumes in Netflix's Glow took inspiration from the original TV series, and as you can see, relied heavily on offensive and deeply problematic racial stereotypes. The examples on the slide, the comparisons between the original characters and the Netflix characters, are taken from an Insider article that I've linked on the slide. When the women are developing their personas in season 1, producer Bash steers them away from nuanced characters with backstories in favour of stereotypes. He points to different members of the cast in turn and says, "She's a party girl, you're Oriental, you're an Arab, you're a big black girl. It's not a judgment, it's just what I and the rest of the entire world see with our eyes." Director Sam at one point claims that the essence of his show is women metaphorically wrestling with their own stereotypes. But the emotional labour that these women perform as they wrestle with the implications of perpetuating offensive stereotypes is a recurring theme throughout the series, which clearly mobilises what Reed describes as tendentious images of people of colour. In season 3, episode Freaky Tuesday, the characters swap personas, swap gimmicks for a night, and Jenny, played by Ellen Wong, is horrified when she sees her character Fortune Cookie, who you can see on the slide, played by Caucasian Melrose, who plays up all of the most stereotypically racist aspects of the character, and leads to Jenny confronting the fact that by playing Fortune Cookie, she is perpetuating harmful racist stereotypes. In season 1, Tammy, who plays Welfare Queen, who's played by Kia Stevens, confronts her own conflicted feelings about playing a character who plays into such negative racial stereotypes of Black women. And as I said, this is something that the series consciously plays with, the compromises that these women make to break into a world and a sport dominated by white men, the parts of themselves they have to hide, modify, or betray to participate. And there's an ongoing and interesting tension in Glow between authenticity and fakeness, as the wrestling ring is offered as a space in which women, many of whom in the series are failed actresses, can perform alternative modes of femininity that are not open to them in mainstream media and in Hollywood. But this is always balanced against the inherent artifice of professional wrestling and Glow's reliance on hackneyed stereotypes. And in places, the series does mount an effective critique of the gendered and racial politics of the 1980s. However, in 2020, when Glow production was put on hiatus due to COVID, the women of colour in the cast used the opportunity presented by this break to have a frank conversation with the series producers and creators about the way that they as actors and their characters were being sidelined. And this meaning that the tensions regarding racial stereotypes that they kind of teased out in the first couple of series were never worked through or properly addressed. The open letter that you can see an extract of on the slide was signed by Sydelle Noel, Brittany Young, Kia Stevens, Sunita Mani, Ellen Wong, and Shakira Barrera, who were the women of colour in Glow's cast. They point out the absence of persons of colour as writers for Glow's fourth series and point to the fact that their characters were frequently narratively sidelined in favour of white characters. The response to the letter was seemingly very positive, with many promised changes before the show was summarily cancelled. The second extract on the slide is from a post on Instagram by Sunita Mani, who played Artie, or Beirut the Mad Bomber, in which she calls Glow, both the Netflix show and the show within the Netflix show, a female-powered underdog, and praises the creative and supportive space created by her female co-stars. And I think this is the power and potential of female ensemble drama, constructing women-centered spaces in which they are allowed to drive the narrative. And as Glow demonstrates, these spaces work best when they are intersectional and give space to perspectives and stories beyond white, cisgendered, able-bodied women. Derry Girls, it has to be said, is exceptionally white. According to population stats, Northern Ireland is currently 98% white, but there are a number of powerful accounts from people of colour who lived through the Troubles. So it remains to be seen if their perspectives will make it into the fourth series, and I really hope they do. So the final point I want to make is about the way that both series make use of historical anchor points to add a sense of verisimilitude to their diegetic eras, and the role that television plays in establishing these anchor points. In Glow, we see Ruth and Debbie, in character as Zoya the Destroyer and Liberty Bell, react to the live broadcast of the Challenger shuttle disaster, which was broadcast live on American television in 1986. In the final episode of season 1 of Derry Girls, in one of my absolute favourite moments of television, we watch Erin's family reacting to news of a large-scale fatal bombing. And although Lisa McGee has said that this wasn't based on any one specific incident from the Troubles, it was intended to be on the same scale as the Omar bomb in 1998, which killed 29 people. In an interview, McGee said that she included the incident at the end of the series to demonstrate that there were times when the situation in Northern Ireland, quote, floored you. There were lots of day-to-day things that were funny, but occasionally there was something big like Omar, and the whole nation went, this just has to change. And I think I wanted to mix that in with this life goes on thing, end quote. She commented on the central role that television played in these moments, saying there were lots of times when your family stood around the TV and just couldn't speak because this was people in your own place doing it to each other, end quote. And for many watching the series, the image of the family standing around the TV in horrified solidarity will also be one that they recognise. And it's another moment in which Derry Girls so effectively translates the realities of the Troubles, both farcical and horrifying, into a domestic setting. And that's it. There is so much more that I want to say, and hopefully we'll get to at some point about both of these series. But for now, thank you very much for listening.
Okay. Well, thank you, Kat, for that wonderful paper. And I think the three of you demonstrated what a range of topics can be covered when we have a title like Gender and Stroke on Television. It covers a whole load of worlds. So now I think you're invited in the audience to turn on your camera if you like, and also to put questions, mainly by raising your hand if you're willing to speak, which is always nice on these events. But there has been a question in the chat rubric, which I think is worth us just having another look at, Sonia. You've answered it, but I think I'd like to give you the chance of speaking to it. So Iana Vuvu from Greece, sorry, welcome.
Yes. Hello, thank you for the
you're there. Okay, do you want to speak? Yes, off you go.
Thank you all three of the speakers for your passionate speeches and presentations, and thank you, Sonia. I thought we were writing the questions, and I am reading your answer, and I mean you mainly answered it, but I think.
Sorry, can I just intervene and suggest, Sonia, one of the elements of quite a long question was the reason for this shocking absence of Black men and women in the programs? Was that to do with the target audience, i.e. the target audience was of a different, was not an ethnic audience, and therefore that explains why the presenters, etc., are on there. So I wonder if you might just say something about that, and then you could come back in terms of your question.
Yeah, I've just written my answer, but I can come back and say that I can't believe it's not. Well, we are conducting now some interviews with the directors of Portuguese channels, news channels, to try to understand this so visible discrimination by gender and by race. But I think we are understanding that this is not, for me, it's not a thing that remains on the target audience. No, the audience of this program have also Black women, Black men, women, Roman women in Portugal. But what we are seeing 4 years from now, we are seeing mostly white men from Lisbon, which is the capital of our country, and some women, more since the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic started, but also white women. Only one woman that it is our Minister of Justice. We have. It's not right, because Portugal is not all black, all with white women like me.
Yeah.
So something is wrong, and the fact is there is clear discrimination of Black people in television. And of course, my point of view is gender studies turning to women, and we are looking also to other genders of in media, like entertainment and mostly fiction, and we are noticing that Black women in Portugal are represented as erotic women, or the Black woman that serves white families. And this is like a circle that continues to explore some stereotypes that were built in the colonial past, Portuguese past.
Okay.
I think it's that we are working in this topic because in Portugal we have no the Portuguese government and the Portuguese state does not have studies by race or ethnic populations. We are all the same. No, yes,
Okay.
all the same by the same rights, but we need to know who we are, where we are, and how we represent ourselves. And media represents women, men, black, non-white, and so.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. Okay, anybody else got a question to ask? Oops, sorry. Oh, Derek Johnson.
Hi, thank you. Wonderful and intriguing papers, all of them. I wanted to ask Anna, I was particularly interested in the way you were saying that this is both emphasizing national identities and traditions, but also looking at that kind of European identity that was developing in the post-war era, something I've been looking at in relation to British TV. So I'd be intrigued to hear just some more about how that appeared in these programs.
Thank you for your question. This is really an interesting question. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure whether I know a straightforward answer. Because I think that a lot of these countries were more or less trying to establish the national identity first. And you can see this really clearly on the case of Italy, Portugal, not so much in socialism, because there it was more to do with modernization and, you know, teaching people to get away from the past traditions and be more modern, better, and so on. But the question for me would be, when I was editing this book on food and cooking on early television, I was wondering to what extent actually these cooking programs are a representation of a European way of doing things. And what is interesting, I think, here is that, for example, in the US, you have a lot of this trying to represent the ethnic cuisines like Chinese and so on and so forth. As you have Julia Child, but you also have the Chinese and all of that. You don't really have so much of this in Europe. You have a return to tradition, as in the case of Italy, where people are scared of losing their tradition, and then they want to sort of say, oh, look, there is modernization, but at the same time, there's all these wonderful things that we used to do. Let's record them. Or the case in Portugal, or you have the case potentially in Britain going away from the French kind of cooking to more British cooking, as you have in other places, rather than really looking at other minorities as such. So I think it's yet to be discovered to what extent this is European. And can you say this is European at all? But I would be quite interested to maybe connect with you and chat to what you think about it at some point.
Thank you. I mean, it wasn't, I'm not looking so much at cookery, but I do know, I'm trying to remember the name. We had a major celebrity chef person in the UK in the 50s who was famous for bringing French and Italian cooking in. And yes. I'm intrigued to know if that was the sort of thing that was happening elsewhere, because we also had Philip Harben doing Elizabethan feasts and so on. So thank you very much.
But yes, it was. You know, for example, in there was always this drive, say in Yugoslavia, about representing cuisines of other nations of Yugoslavia, or other French cuisine, or Viennese cuisine, Italian, of course. But it was more pragmatic in that case than to do with the identity as such.
Okay. Kat, did you have a comment you wanted to make?
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask Anna something following on from Derek's question.
Sure.
This might be a bit out of your kind of like time period, but I remember Jamie Oliver, who is a particularly annoying British chef. Sorry to any Jamie Oliver fans in the audience. Doing a series where he travelled around Italy. And I remember my husband speaks Italian, and we were watching one episode of it, and he was cooking with this Italian grandmother, and he kept referring to her as nonna. And at one point she says in Italian, and it's not picked up on the subtitles, but my husband translated it. Apparently she says, "Call me nonna one more time and I'll break your face." And it just really struck me with what you were saying about the idea of colonizing spaces that are traditionally feminine. This kind of seems to me to add another layer to it. You have this British man like wandering over to this Italian grandmother's kitchen and like throwing himself around, and it just seems like such a trespassing on a space that he has no right to. And I just wondered if that was something that you come across a lot as well.
You do. For example, you have in Italy this guy's Soldati, who goes around in the 60s in the Po Valley, and he records all these traditions as well of, you know, the Po Valley, in order to show them to other Italians, because, you know, now we have the nation, let's make Italians through television. And he goes around also these older nonnas and so on and so forth, and he asks them things, although of course they wouldn't say these things on record. But it was that sense of, I know I'm a male, I'm an expert, I am a presenter, and now I'm showing everybody what I decide to show of your world and of your life. Whereas in Portugal, you almost have a reverse, where are these women send in the recipes that they want to send, and the Maria Modesto selects them and then publishes them. I think it's a very different sort of way of dealing with it.
Okay.
But thank you, Kat.
Thank you very much. Kat, I wondered if I might ask you, I was very interested in the comments of the cast about how their storylines were treated, or how they were treated, their characters were treated. And I wondered if, was there any explanation offered which sort of said, well, we're showing the 80s and therefore we can't, you know, use your characters differently, or did the makers of the program, you know, take it on board and resolve to do better?
Well, unfortunately, we never really got to find out because the show was cancelled. Based on follow-up posts from people like Sunita Mani and Ellen Wong, who were two of the original authors of the letter, they have indicated that the response to their concerns was very positive, was very constructive, and there wasn't any that kind of thing, well, that's just how it was in the 80s. It was because what Glow set itself up to do, I think, in the first two series is say, yes, this is the 80s, and this, you know, we've got the original source material that shows that this series played with these stereotypes and perpetuated these stereotypes, and we're not going to shy away from that. But what we're going to do is show these women wrestling, like figuratively or metaphorically, with the cost on them of playing these characters as the only way they can participate in a television show, the only way they can get onto a television show, the only way they can get paid work is to adopt and play these characters. And the promise was that that was going to be something that was really explored and carried through all of the series. And Freaky Tuesday is a wonderful episode, and they do kind of deal with that in that episode. Jenny talks about being a survivor of the Cambodian genocide, and Melrose talks about her heritage as a second generation Jewish American whose grandparents died in Treblinka. So it is kind of dealt with, and it sounds like from the responses to that letter that it was going to be something that was directly addressed. They had 4 specific demands, one of which was to have a person of colour in the writers' room, and that was something that they did. So it does sound like it was addressed positively. It's just, unfortunately, we'll never get to see it.
Okay. Kevin Geddes, did you want to say anything? You've got a hand up, I think. No? Right, that's all right. Oh no, it was a light. Sorry. I'm so sorry. It was a light.
Yeah, sorry.
I can't distinguish between the hand and the thumb. Okay, right. Any more questions from from the audience.
Christine, I think Iona has one for
Well,
Kat.
I'm so sorry, Iona, I didn't realise
No,
that.
never mind.
Thank you.
I'm enjoying this discussion. Well, I would like to thank Kat also for your superb analysis. And I am wondering, in a more general way, it's an hypothesis, if this feministic kind of feministic rereading of history in diegetic fictional worlds is up to a point somehow veiling present issues of violence or and inequality against women. To put it in other words, perhaps an hypothesis would be that it is safer to put this feministic turn somewhere in the past.
I think you're muted.
Sorry. I completely agree. Absolutely. I think Katia Aguirre has got a really fascinating paper where she talks about this kind of thing in Mad Men, about how historical fictions particularly are held at one remove from the audience's direct experience. And I talk about it a bit in relation to Agent Carter, which is a Marvel series, in that by sealing these kind of questions of feminist struggle and oppression in the past, you hold it at one remove from the audience's experience, and you kind of give the illusion that it's fine because we fixed it. In the intervening time between then and now, we fixed it, so you don't need to worry about it. And it also facilitates a kind of recirculation of these problematic behaviors and attitudes, because again, there's that buffer of saying, oh, but we're just showing the past. It's fine to use that language and show that homophobia, that racism, because it's the past. It's not a problem we have now. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Sonia, would you like to say a little bit more? Sorry, you. Yes. Your research was only into television news, as I understand it. But would you see a way of extending it into fictional dramas, as of the kind Kat has been discussing?
We are now kind of thinking and organizing. We are doing some exploratory studies, but our main goal is to find out how these women are represented mostly in television fiction series and television Portuguese novels. They are similar to Brazilian soap operas.
Yes.
So it's a long path, but we are starting because our first analysis, our exploratory studies, are not very encouraging. But yeah, we are doing this, and we are trying to do here in Portugal, and somehow with link to Brazil, because we are receiving for a long time ago cultural media cultural Brazilian one in Portugal. So we are very close. I don't know if there is good or not, but the stereotypes that are present in Brazilian soap operas are equally present here in Portuguese soap operas.
Right. Okay.
Thank
Elke,
you.
I think you had a comment.
Yeah, I have a question actually for Anna and for Kat, derived from Sonia's concept of the kind of invisibility or perspective in particular that is lacking, the Black women's perspective, and that kind of particular experience is missing. I'm wondering with your papers, Anna and Kat, what really strikes me is, like, Anna, you were pointing out how you know, the women's perspective in the cooking shows is very different from the men's insofar that it's all about, you know, domesticity and authenticity and lived culture versus professionalism in the more male or more male-centered cooking shows. And for Kat, the thing that really strikes me is you said, yes, the troubles are acknowledged, but what is interesting, it's nevertheless, you know, with Dairy Girls in particular, it's a separate kind of thing. The troubles are the background, but they're not, you know, they're not really there. So I wondered if you wanted to comment on kind of how television is nevertheless limited in gendered perspectives, so that gender is still quite imagined in very, very kind of boxed off ways. Yeah, women are not engaging with the troubles, or, you know, indeed, women in the 60s, 50s and 60s couldn't yet go out or be presented as those professional chefs.
Okay, who'd like to start? Kat, why don't you pick that up first?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Aga. That's a really good question. And I think, yeah, I think you're very right in the only real way that the women of Dairy Girls interact with the troubles is when it invades the domestic space, when they are standing around the TV and it's a moment of trauma and it's a moment of rupture in a way. It's this something that was external has suddenly been thrust into this feminine domestic space. And otherwise, the only way that they really interact with it is kind of like in the comedic way of, you know, interacting with the soldiers. It's kind of as an inconvenience into their daily lives, but it's not something that is in their direct experience. It's something that they move around rather than interact with. So yeah, I think it is kind of boxed off, and in a way the troubles are still a masculine thing that invades a feminine space. So yeah, I think there is definitely still that limitation. That's something that I'd want to think more about. So thank you very much for pointing that out. It's a really good point.
Okay.
Thank you very much. It's a great question. Although I wonder to what extent on early television there was in fact a big problem of how to actually, you know, make television at that time. I interviewed some of these early people, and they said, well, we thought, oh, this could be something to cook. This would be something nice to watch. People might be interested. They found somebody who was nearby to do the stuff, and so they did it. Like, it wasn't really thought through, I imagine, to think, oh, let's find some diverse people to show. It was the first person who came by, in the case of Yugoslavia, was on television, and so it just happened that, you know, this particular guy was there. And they never thought of putting women there, because who would want to listen to a woman? Anyway, you can ask your neighbor for the same advice. You know, that is the kind of mentality that was there. It's like, why would you want to listen to a woman on television? Just go to your neighbor or somebody you know, they will tell you exactly the same thing. So I guess it's a little bit of that. The other thing is that, of course, when television appears as technology, the kind of roles that appear on television are similar roles that you see in the news, in the magazines, that you see on the radio before, and that you see in cookbooks even before. So there is no exact rupture in that. It's just a continuation and slow change of whatever roles were there. And unfortunately, I imagine, although I haven't done any research in this, is that women really weren't professional cooks at that time yet. In real life, I mean, you know, they started maybe slowly to eat. And if they did cook as professional cooks, they weren't educated in schools. I know that a lot of them just learned on the job, and they became whatever they were. So I guess it needs more research into actually thinking about how these shows were produced and why these types of women and these types of men were shown as they did, as they were. But it's a very good question. Thank you.
Okay. Well, it's interesting you say that, Anna, because I think all three of you have shown how more research is needed in the areas in which you're exploring. And my understanding and my faith is that you are all doing that. So that seems like a very good thing. Kat, I can't resist saying I do think a comparison between wrestling, the behavior of the wrestlers and the behavior of the nuns in Derry Girl ought to be definitely a topic for a
Absolutely.
journal article, if
Absolutely.
nothing else. So, anyway, okay, I think we are, Elke, it's 14:29, so I think we might bring it to a close there and say thank you so much to the panelists. It's been a really very interesting and rewarding session. We can clap for you, yes, definitely. And Elke, I think we do, as we sign out here, there is another session starting at 3 o'clock. Do you want to say anything about that briefly?
Yes, that's right. So the next session starts at 3 and is on internet and television, or as television.
Okay, well, that's lovely. I'm just, you're getting lots of thanks and applause on the chat notice, so that's nice. Okay, thank you very much to all the people who attended from all over the place. It's really nice to see so many people beaming into us. Thanks very much. Okay, bye-bye. Okay.